Hi, good morning. It's wonderful to be back here. Wonderful to see you here. I'm teaching this class because I wish a class like this had been taught when I was sitting in your seats as an undergrad here. This does not mean that it's a class you wish to be taught, nor does it mean that it's the right class for you. What I hope to do in the next couple of lectures is give you an idea of what this class is about so that you can decide whether or not it is for you. I came here in 1992 and started off as a computer science concentrator, and then had a mini epiphany halfway through my sophomore year. I realized that I was in a wonderful place with wonderful students around me, wonderful teachers. I was doing well academically. I was doing well in athletics. I was playing varsity squash at the time. I was doing well socially. Everything was going well, except for the fact that I was unhappy. And I didn't understand why. And it was then, in a matter of moments, that I decided that I had to find out why and become happier. And that's when I switched my concentration from computer science to philosophy and psychology, with a single question: how can I become happier? Over time, I did become happier. What had contributed most to my happiness was when I encountered a new emerging field. At that time didn't have the name that it has today, but essentially research that falls under or within the field of positive psychology. Positive psychology, studying it, applying the ideas to my life has made me significantly happier. It continues to make me happier. And it was when I realized the impact that it had on me that I decided to share it with others. That's when I decided that I wanted to be a teacher and teach this field. So this is Positive Psychology, Psychology 1504. And we'll be exploring this new, relatively new, and fascinating field. And hopefully, we will be exploring more than the field, ourselves. When I first taught this class, it was back in 2002, I taught it as a seminar and had 8 students. 2 dropped out. That left me with 6. The year after, the class became slightly larger. I had over 300 students. And then the third year when I taught it, which was the last time, I had 850 students in the class, making it at that point the largest course at Harvard. And that's when the media became interested, because they wanted to understand why. They wanted to understand this phenomenon that here you have a class that's larger than Introduction to Economics. How could that be? So I was invited by the media for interviews, whether it was newspapers, radio, television. And I started to notice a pattern during those interviews. So I would walk into the interview, we'd have the interview, and afterwards the producer or the interviewer would walk me out and say something to the effect of, well, thank you, Tal, for the interview, but you know, I expected you to be different. And I would ask as nonchalantly as I could, of course, as if I didn't really care, but had to ask anyway, how different? And they would say, well, you know, we expected you to be more outgoing. Next interview, at the end of the interview, same thing. Thank you for doing the interview, but, you know, Tal, I expected you to be different. And once again, nonchalantly, of course, I would ask, so how different? And he or she would say, well, you know, we expected you to be less introverted. Next interview, same thing. How different? Well, you know, more extroverted, more outgoing. Next interview, well, you know, less shy. Because, you know, I get very nervous in interviews. Interview after interview, literally dozens. More outgoing, more cheerful, less introverted, more extroverted, and on and on. But here is the best one. So this is one of the local channels here in around Boston. I go into the interview. We have quite a long interview, which I thought was actually pretty good. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer, who's a very jolly guy, walks me out, puts his hand on my shoulder, and says, Tal, thank you very much for doing the interview. And then the usual comes. But you know, Tal, I expected you to be different. And I said, how different? And now, just so that you understand, by this time, my self-esteem is shot. But still, with some semblance of nonchalance, I ask, how different? And he looks at me and says, well, I don't know, Tal, I expected you to be taller. Taller? What, 5'7", or okay, 5'6.5" is not enough to teach happiness? And I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot, the whole pattern from the beginning. And I think I understand why they expected someone different. You see, they had to explain to themselves, as well as the audience, how come this class is larger than Introduction to Economics? And the way to explain it must be that the teacher is very outgoing, extremely charismatic, very cheerful, an extrovert, and of course, tall. Well, there was one L missing there, but yeah, if only. So the problem, though, is that they were looking in the wrong place for the explanation. In other words, they were looking at the messenger. Where they needed to look at was at the message. Now, how do I know that? You see, because I see other positive psychology classes on other campuses around the country and around the world. There are over 200 campuses here in the United States that teach positive psychology. On almost every campus where this class is taught, it's either one of the or the largest class. It's about the message. I see more and more organizations taking up positive psychology in their, as consultant companies. Some of the big consulting companies are taking it on. More and more high schools are introducing positive psychology classes. Elementary schools are introducing it. Governments around the world are expressing an interest in this new and emerging field. Why? Because it works. Because it really works. You see, this whole realm of life flourishing, of happiness, of well-being, has been, until recently, dominated by the self-help movement. What do we have in the self-help movement? We have books that are very interesting, that are very accessible. We have speakers who are very outgoing, very charismatic and tall, attracting in the masses into these workshops and seminars and lectures. But, and there is a very big but here, many of these books, many of these workshops and seminars lack substance. Very often over-promising and under-delivering. So these are the 5 things you need to know to be happy. The 3 things to be the great leader. The 1 secret of success, happiness, and the perfect love life. Over-promising, under-delivering. On the other hand, we have academia. What do we have in academia? We have a lot of rigor, a lot of substance. We have data that's analyzed, reanalyzed, and meta-analyzed. Things that actually work. Good stuff. But, and there is also a very big but here, very few people refereed academic journals. I mean, think about it. How many people outside of this room, of course, have read the last 12 issues of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology? Well, most people don't even know what that means. The head of my PhD program actually estimated that the average academic journal article is read by 7 people. that includes the author's mother. So, and I say it half in jest, but it's actually really sad, because, certainly sad for me as an academic, because these things are good, they're important, things that make a difference, can make even more of a difference, but not accessible to most people. And this is where positive psychology comes in. And this is also where this class comes in. The explicit mandate of positive psychology, as well as of this class, is to create a bridge between the ivory tower and Main Street. In other words, it is to bring the rigor, the substance, the empirical foundation, the science from academia, and merge it with the accessibility of the self-help or New Age movement. In a way, the best of both worlds. And this explains the popularity of the field of positive psychology. Science that works. This class will be taught on 2 levels. The first level, it will be taught like any other class in psychology or any of the classes that you have taken here. You'll be introduced here to studies, to research, to rigorous academic work. You will be writing a paper, an academic paper. You'll be taking exams, just like every other class. But then it will also be taught at a second level, which is for every paper that you'll read, every paper that you will write, you will always be thinking, okay, so how can I take these ideas and apply them to my life? How can I apply them to my relationship? How can I apply them to my community? 2 levels. The academic, applied. I did not just introduce, whether it's in the readings or in lectures, ideas just because they're interesting for the sake of the idea. It's always an idea that is both rigorous and can be applied. Just a few words about housekeeping. Some of the questions that I've already received from you before the class started. So this, unfortunately, is the last time that I'm teaching positive psychology or any other class for that matter at Harvard. Hopefully, within 2 years, probably not next year, but within 2 years, there will be positive psychology class offered, but I certainly cannot guarantee it. About feedback and questions. If you have any question, if anything is not clear, if you agree or disagree with something, email me or email your TF, and we'll always respond. Sometimes, if the question is asked by enough people, we'll respond to it publicly, always anonymously, unless you specify specifically that your name can be mentioned. But sometimes, you may be listening to a lecture, and then halfway through it, there's an emergency. There is something that you really have to ask, something that cannot wait. In that case, please, just put your hand out, because, it's like when you just have to go to the bathroom, just, can't stop, can't wait, and when you gotta go, you gotta go. So we'll take a positive psychology break for that. And just stop me halfway through, and I'll answer any question. All the PowerPoints, as well as the videos of the classes, will be online. Will be available within a couple of days. Well, the PowerPoints will be available before, except for this lecture, will be available before, so that you can use them in class. The videos, unfortunately, cannot be made available before. We tried, couldn't figure it out. So they will be available within a day or two after. And the reason why they're up there, first of all, I do prefer that you attend lecture. I do prefer that you're physically here. You get things in the energy of the room with so many students that you wouldn't get just in front of your computer. But the reason why I do put them up is so that you have an opportunity, if you want to see it again, or if you happen to miss a class, that's perfectly fine. And also because, and this is also the reason why the PowerPoints are always available, I want you to be engaged in the material. I want you to be engaged in whatever it is that we're discussing in class, not necessarily thinking about getting down every word that I say on paper, remembering everything, memorizing everything. I want you to take, rather than passive notes of writing down what it says on the PowerPoint or every word that I say, I'd like you to take active notes. And that means being engaged with the material. For example, if you hear something, an idea that you say, oh, that's interesting, star it, write it down. Or, okay, I think I'm going to start applying this. Write it down. Or, I want to tell my mom about this later. Or I want to talk to my roommates or my team about this idea. Write it down. Active note-taking as opposed to passive note-taking for two reasons. First of all, as I said, this class is a class about making a difference in people's lives. I would not be teaching the class just for its academic beauty, though there is a lot of academic beauty in this field. So write down if you have ideas that you think you can apply. The second reason why we should do that is because it's more, you'll remember more. Better retention, better understanding of the material if you're actively engaged as opposed to just taking down passive notes. Throughout the class, starting next week, we'll take what I call time-ins as opposed to time-outs. It's like a time-out. It's a time where we stop the class and you look inward. And this is literally a time of silence in the class. I will stop for a minute or two, and you'll have a chance either to just stare at me or anyone else, or think about what we've just discussed, or have a guiding question that I will provide you that you will address during the class. The reason why I have timings, and this is something that I'm introducing this year for the first time, we didn't have it last time, is because over the last 2 years since I last taught it, I've done a lot of work in the area of silence. I've read a lot of research in this area about the importance of quiet times, whether it's in a class, in a lecture, whether it is at home, whether it's for a leader in a business, for a relationship, for children, starting from preschools. Now, many of you, as you're going through these time-ins, if you decide to take the class, may think, well, is this what I'm paying $40,000 a year for? To sit in a class and be quiet? Well, first of all, it will only be a minute or two at a time, maybe once or twice a lecture. But second, it may be the most important thing that you take from this class, the notion of embracing stillness. Let me read to you an excerpt from a study that was run by 2 MIT professors. By the way, all the names that I read that are not on the PowerPoints, you don't need to remember or write down. This is just for your edification. But so David Foster and Matthew Wilson. Both of them are from MIT and did the following study that I think confirms the importance of a time to look inside. What they did was they scanned the brains of rats while they were in a maze and after they went through the maze. And here is what they found. What the results suggest is that while there certainly is some record of your experience as it is occurring, in other words, when they were doing the maze, the actual learning, when you try to figure out what was important, what should I keep and throw away, that happens after the fact, during periods of quiet, wakeful introspection. What they showed was rats who went through the maze and then went through the maze again and again learned far less than rats who took time aside, chilled out a little bit after a maze, had a margarita, embraced stillness. This has implications, and they showed implications to human beings as well, not only those who are on the rat race, all human beings. So what they say is that replay might constitute a general mechanism of learning and memory, both learning, understanding, as well as memory, retention. When we reflect, when we replay the material, we're much more likely to retain, to remember what we have just been through. So the importance of time aside is cannot be overemphasized. In his wonderful book on teaching, Parker Palmer, it's called The Courage to Teach, says the following: words are not the sole medium of exchange in teaching and learning. We educate with silence as well. Silence gives us a chance to reflect on what we have said and heard. In authentic education, silence is treated as a trustworthy matrix for the inner work students must do, a medium for learning of the deepest sort. Silence is something that's missing from our culture. I know that many of you have probably read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert M. Pirsig. Well, he has a second book out, less well known, called Lila. And Lila is an anthropological study of Native Americans. And what he does there is compare their culture to Americans from European ancestry. And one of the distinguishing characteristics between these two cultures is their approach towards silence. What he found was when he went and sat around with Native Americans, they would sit around the fire and hang out for 2-3 hours without saying a word. Just sit around, look at one another, smile, have a good time, introspect, just be there for hours. Whereas he points out that in our culture we feel very uncomfortable with the absence of words, with the absence of sound or noise. We have to fill up all the gaps. And this is an important cultural difference, and we pay a price for this lack of stillness. A price that I will talk about a lot when I talk about relationships, when I talk about virtue and morality, and when we talk about happiness and well-being in general. Let me give you a little bit of background on positive psychology, how it came about and how this class came about. In many ways, positive psychology is the brainchild, the product, the grandchild of humanistic psychology. What we have in humanistic psychology is essentially a reaction to the existing psychologies of the time. The founders, considered the founders of humanistic psychology, in fact called it the third force. Why the third force? Because the first force was behaviorism, the work of Skinner, the work of Watson, the work of Thorndike. This was the first force. The second force was psychoanalysis, the work of Freud, Jung, Adler to some extent. This was the second force. And the third force, humanistic psychology, came as a reaction to it. First, as a reaction to behaviorism. Behaviorism looks at the human entity, at the person, as basically a collection of behaviors, as a box, like a billiard ball knocked around by reinforcements, by punishment, by reward. And what humanistic psychology said was that we're much more than just a billiard ball being knocked around. We have a spirit, we have a soul, we have cognitions and thoughts that matter. It's not just behavior that's important for understanding as well as improving life. And then psychoanalysis, the second force. What psychoanalysis is about, basically understanding mostly through the subconscious. That's how you understand it. That's how you improve the quality of life. There are defense mechanisms, there are biological instincts, neuroses, and if we understand these very often dark forces, we're better able to handle and deal with life, understand as well as improve the quality of life. Humanistic psychology says a human being is much more than that, much more than biological instincts, much more than neuroses, much more than a person who exists in a Newtonian reality, like a billiard ball. We need to value much more the human being. We need to give much more dignity and freedom to the person. There was a problem. The problem was with humanistic psychology is that it lacked the rigorous methodology. While it brought in many wonderful ideas, talked about the study of well-being, talked about the study of optimism, of kindness, of morality, of virtue, of love, relationships, of peak experiences, of self-actualization, of empathy, all these wonderful concepts that we'll talk about throughout the semester, it wasn't as rigorous about its epistemology, about how we form ideas and how we learn. And that's why, in many ways, largely, not completely, but it largely morphed into the self-help movement. Interesting ideas, good ideas, important ideas, certainly good intentions, but to some extent without the academic rigor. And that's why it lacked to have the impact on academia. That's why we don't have hardly any humanistic psychology classes offered at universities today. There are very few still around. And this is why also a lot of it became the new age, essentially. But still, it's humanistic psychology that has, in many ways, fathered and mothered, as we'll see, positive psychology. So let's meet the grandparents. People like Rollo May, people like Carl Rogers, and more than anyone, Abraham Maslow. Was the American Psychological Association president, was a professor just down the road here at Brandeis. And he introduced this humanistic psychology. In 1954, he wrote a chapter called Toward a Positive Psychology. 1954. In it, he said we need to also research kindness and goodness and happiness and optimism. In many ways, was way ahead of his time. Then, if Maslow is the grandfather, then Karen Horney is the grandmother. Initially a psychoanalyst, trained through the works of Freud, realized that the focus has been too much on the negative, on neurosis, on psychosis, and said we also, not only, but also have to focus on what is working in the human organism. We have to look at the fine qualities and cultivate those, because part of being human is being those things as well. In many ways, brought about the movement toward humanistic psychology, and through that, positive psychology. Aaron Antonovsky, the third person I would consider the grandfather, brought in the idea of focusing on health. He has a new concept, or he introduced a new concept. I'm still here, don't worry. He introduced a new concept which he called, it's his own neologism, salutogenesis. Salutogenesis, saluto health, genesis, origin. The origin of health. And this was an alternative model to the conventional wisdom model of pathologies. So instead of just studying pathologies, whether it's in physical health or psychological health, we should also study the origin of health. In many ways, that is what preventative medicine is about. So this was a novel idea back in the 1970s when he introduced it. And we'll talk a lot about Aaron Antonovsky. Now the parents. Marty Seligman, considered the father of the positive psychology network of scholars, started the field in 1998. Like Maslow, he too was the president of the American Psychological Association, and as his mandate during his presidency, he had two aims. The first aim, to make academic psychology more accessible. In other words, bridge Ivory Tower and Main Street. This was the first aim of his presidency. The second aim was to introduce a positive psychology, a psychology that will look at also things that work, that will not just study depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, or neurosis. A psychology, a network of scholars who will focus on love, relationship, self-esteem, motivation, resilience, and well-being. And he introduced these ideas, and it's all been literally uphill from then. Before Marty Seligman, this happened all in 1998, and we'll talk about it a little bit more next time. This all happened in 1998. Long before 1998, our very own Professor Alan Langer did research in all these areas, bring the humanistic spirit and combining it with the academic scientific rigor. We're going to be talking probably more than about any other scholar about her work in this class. And another person from Harvard, one of the parents of positive psychology, was Philip Stone, who passed away 2 years ago, yesterday. Both Langer and Stone were my thesis advisors, introduced me to the field of positive psychology, into this research. In 1998, when they had the first Positive Psychology Summit, Professor Stone took me along with him. I was his graduate student. In 1999, he taught the first positive psychology class at Harvard, one of the first in the world. I was his teaching fellow. A couple of years later, he taught it again. Again, I was his teaching fellow. And then, when I graduated, he suggested that I take over his class. And here we are today. So this is 1504. Let me give you a sense of, in the next half hour or so, a sense of what to expect in this class. The first thing is that this class is not just about information. It is also explicitly about transformation. What do I mean by that? You see, most of education today is about information. What is information? So we have a container, which is our mind, and information is about taking data, taking science, taking information, and putting it inside the form. That is information. Now, when this form is filled, that's when we're educated. More information, more data, better. Not enough. Because it's not just information that determines our well-being, our success, our self-esteem, our motivational level, the relationship and the quality of our relationships. It's much more than information. Transformation is about taking this form and changing it. Change, form, shape. Change the form. This is transformation. This is a distinction that I learned first from at school Professor Robert Keegan, who talks about this. Information in and of itself is not enough. Think about this example. You go for an athletic meet. Your aim is to get into the top 3, to be a medalist. You come in number 8. What's the analysis? What is the interpretation? Terrible. I just failed. You feel deflated, enervated. On the other hand, the exact same event, you came 8th when you expected to be top 3. You can interpret it as, okay, so what have I learned? I need to work even harder. You become even more energized. You learn from the experience. In other words, the same objective information, which is, I got 8th, I expected top 3. The same information, very different interpretation. One is a disaster. The other interpretation is an opportunity. One leads to loss of energy, the other one to an increase in energy. Or think about another very common example. We know of many people around the world who seemingly have everything, who are doing well, who have more than they need, and yet they're unhappy. And then there are people around the world who have very little, and yet never stop to celebrate life. And then we have the other way around as well. People who have everything and appreciate it and enjoy life. And people who have very little who see themselves as victim. In other words, it's not just the information that goes in, it's also the shape, the interpretation, the perception, the focus. And that is determined by the shape of the form. This is what I realized when I was an undergrad here. Seemingly, looking in from the outside, had everything. Doing well, sports, academics, socially, and yet my perception, my focus, my interpretation of life, not that great. Wasn't happy. The interpretation matters very often a lot more, as we'll see, than the information that goes in. One of the sentences that I'll repeat throughout the class is that happiness is much more contingent on our state of mind than on our status or the state of our bank account. And that's where transformation comes in, and that's why it's so important for well-being. What that will look like in practice is that we will cover not so much information, we'll uncover much more. And I don't mean that in the Berkeley sense of the word. I mean that in the academic sense of the word. In other words, what we'll do is uncover potential that we have inside us, that we've had inside us all along. Maybe we just didn't see, or maybe it was obscured by something or another. We'll uncover it so that we can utilize it, so that we can focus on it, so that we can perceive it. Here's a story just to illustrate this. So this is Michelangelo. One day he was asked by a journalist of his time, how did you create this most amazing masterpiece, David? To which Michelangelo responded, it was easy. I went to the quarry, I saw this huge piece of marble, and in it I saw David. All I needed to do was to chip away the excess stone, to get rid of the marble that shouldn't have been there. And when I got rid of this excess stone, there was David. Now obviously, easier said than done, but the story captures the metaphor of what this class very much is about. It's about chipping away the excess stone. It's about getting rid of limitations, of barriers, whether it's the fear of failure, something that we didn't have as kids, but today most people in our culture have it. It's about chipping away perfectionism that is debilitating and that often hurts us. It's about chipping away our ability for success because maybe we're afraid of success. Maybe we feel guilty about some of the things that we have in our lives and that in turn limits us. Maybe it's about chipping away the limitations in our relationships and why we don't thrive within them. This is what this class is mostly about. As Thoreau says, the soul grows more by subtraction than by addition. By getting rid of these limitations that are preventing us from fulfilling our potential, because our potential is in there in nature, and we'll talk a lot about human nature. It's there, whether it's through God, whether it's through evolution. We have a lot of potential that over time, with external voices, with being part of our culture, that very often these limitations are put on top of us, just like the excess stone. Lao Tzu, in pursuit of knowledge, every day something is acquired. In pursuit of wisdom, every day something is dropped. Knowledge is about information. Wisdom is about transformation. I was recently interviewed for a newsletter on coaching before a large conference on the topic. And the interviewer asked me, so what tips, what tools can you give from positive psychology? So I talked about some of the quote-unquote greatest hits. The importance of gratitude, the importance of physical exercise. I talked about the importance of spending time on our relationships, about taking time aside and simplifying, and so on and so on. And as I was going through my long list, she stopped me and she said, Tal, this is all good, important stuff, I know, but our readers already know that. I'm looking for the wow factor. Come on, surprise me. What can you tell our readers? And I thought about this question for a minute, and I realized that There is no wow. And I told her that. You know, if there is a wow, the wow is that there is no wow. That's it. You see, because the overnight transformation emperor, the emperor of quick fixes, has no clothes. Doesn't exist. It's over-promising and under-delivering. You know, a good life, a fulfilling life, a rich life includes ups and downs, includes pain and getting up again. It includes failure and getting up again. It includes success and celebrating it. Victories and losses, ups and downs, as we'll talk about next week. It's not about this one secret, one wow to the good life. And many of the things that you will learn in this class, you would have heard of before. Probably nothing new to you. You already know it inside of you. And you're going to say, well, this is common sense. And yes, a lot of it is common sense. However, as Voltaire once said, common sense is not that common. And this especially applies to application. So the aim of this class is to make common sense more common, especially in the realm of application. At the end of the class, here is what I'm hoping for. At the end of the class, if you decide to take it, the end of the semester, I don't think, and I'm not expecting you to come and tell me, wow, Tal, thank you for teaching me so many new things. That's not what I'm expecting. I don't think that is what will happen. What I hope will happen is for you to come and say, rather than thank you for teaching me something new, you would say, thank you for reminding me of something that I've already known. And this is what the class is about. It's a constant reminder, twice a week. A constant reminder of what you already know, of what is inside you, the David that is inside you. And what this class will hopefully do is help you to chip away some of these limitations, whether it's cognitive limitations that prevent you from seeing what you already knew, emotional limitations that are preventing you from deriving the benefits of what you already know, or behavioral limitations. The ABC, affect, behavior, and cognition, that we'll talk about during the change week. It's about making common sense more common. Information in and of itself is simply not enough. It's not enough, and what we need in addition to our information highway is a transformation highway. Transformation highway or transformation backroads to counter the fast increasing pace, because as we'll talk about next time, rates of depression are on the rise, rates of anxiety are on the rise, not just in this country, globally. It's literally a global epidemic. And to deal with it, more information will just not do. Just not enough. Here is Archibald MacLeish, who was a poet, was a Harvard professor. What is wrong is not the great discoveries of science. Information is always better than ignorance, no matter what information or what ignorance. What is wrong is the belief behind the information, the belief that information will change the world. It won't. Just adding and filling up our containers with more and more stuff, more and more information, more and more data, it's just not enough. We need more than that. This class will take the humanistic approach. And let me read you a quick excerpt by Abraham Maslow, who talks about this approach. If one took a course or picked up a book on the psychology of learning, most of it, in my opinion, would be beside the point. That is, beside the humanistic point. Most of it would present learning as the acquisition of associations, of skills and capacities that are external and not intrinsic to the human character, to the human personality, to the person himself. External refers to information. Internal refers to the transformation, the changing of the form. And when we talk about transformation, I actually mean it quite literally. Changing of the form, changing of the brain, as we'll talk about when we talk about meditation, for instance. Our brain today can actually, we know that our brain today can actually change. And through fMRI studies since 1998, a new concept came up, which is neurogenesis or neuroplasticity, meaning our brain actually transforms, changes its form throughout our life. So I don't just mean it metaphorically, I also very often mean it literally. Abraham Maslow continues, humanistic philosophy offers a new conception of learning, of teaching, and of education. Stated simply, such a concept holds that the function of education, the goal of education, the human goal, the humanistic goal, the goal so far as human beings are concerned, is ultimately the self-actualization of a person, the becoming fully human, the development of the fullest height that the human species can stand up to or that the particular individual can come to. In a less technical way, it is helping the person to become the best that he is able to become. And this was before the ad came out for the army. I'd be all you can be. This is what the class is about. It's the humanistic approach. It's about fulfilling our potential, chipping away those limitations. Now, to many of you this may sound naive, idealistic. Naive it is not, idealistic it is. And we'll talk about and discuss the importance of idealism and maintaining idealism if we are to introduce personal change, interpersonal change, or community or society change. This class is not about providing answers concerning the good life or happiness. It was about identifying the right questions. Ask and you shall receive, say the scripture. This class is what I think education is all about, which is the quest for information and transformation must begin with a question. Quest, question. It's no coincidence that there is an etymological link between the two. In this class you will be asked many questions. Questions that, as you will see, create reality. We'll talk about that already next time. The importance of the question you ask of yourselves, first and foremost, of your partner, of your students, of your parents, of your employees in the future, teammates, and so on. Questions make a difference. Peter Drucker, the most common source of mistakes in management decisions is the emphasis on finding the right answer rather than the right question. Peter Drucker, considered the most important management scholar of the 20th century, just recently passed away, saying that the biggest mistake is not asking the right questions. As we'll see next time, this is the biggest mistake in research, potentially. This is the biggest mistake in application. Not asking the right questions as well. Whether it's managing an organization, whether it's managing our lives. Now, when I said that questions are important and that answers matter less, I'm not coming from a point of relativism. I'm not a relativist. I think that there are, to some questions, definitive answers that are important to know. However, what I'm saying is that it's important, no less important, to focus on questions when it comes to education. The educator Neil Postman once said that kids enter schools as question marks and they leave as periods. My hope in this class is to bring up many more question marks than periods. Once again, it's about chipping away the excess stone, because as kids, we're always asking questions, we're always curious. Let me show you a quick excerpt from a video of one of my favorite psychologists, well, actually he's a comedian, Seinfeld. Here he is talking about, and we'll watch a lot of excerpts throughout the semester, talking about what we were like as kids. Is this in your way?
So the first couple of years I made my own costumes, which of course sucked. The ghost, the hobo, no good. Then finally, third year, begging the parents, got the Superman Halloween costume, not surprisingly. Cardboard box, cellophane top, mask included. Remember the rubber band on the back of that mask? That was a quality item there, wasn't it? That was good for about 10 seconds before it snapped out of that cheap little staple they put it in there with. You go to your first house, trick or snap, it broke, I don't believe it. Wait up, you guys, I gotta fix it. Hey, wait up! Wait up! That's what kids say. They don't say wait. They say, wait up! Hey, wait up! Because when you're little, your life is up, the future is up, everything you want is up. Wait up, hold up, shut up. Mom, I'll clean up, let me stay up. Parents, of course, are just the opposite. Everything is down, just calm down. Slow down. Come down here, sit down, put that down.
So again, this curiosity, this looking up, this opening up, as opposed to closing down that kids have, this notion, this is what I hope will happen in this class. The one real object of education is to leave a man in the condition of continually asking questions. So here's a longitudinal study that was done by John Cotter. John Cotter, professor of leadership and management at the business school across the river, came to Harvard in 1972, joined the faculty, and started to follow Harvard class, MBA class of 1973, and followed them for 20 years. And what he was interested in was to find out all the information that he could about this class. What he found 20 years later, early 90s, when the study ended, was that these students were ex-students were extremely successful, very wealthy, having a lot of impact, whether it's on their organization, the community, did extremely well. But within the large group of highly successful Harvard MBAs, he found a small group that was extraordinarily successful, more successful than the rest of the group, whether it's in terms of income, whether it's in terms of impact, whether it's in terms of overall quality of life. Extraordinarily successful. And what he wanted to identify was why. What distinguishes this small group from the rest of the pack? Very successful, but not quite as successful as that small group. And he found only two things. It was not their IQs that made no difference whatsoever to their long-term success. It was not where they came from, pre-MBA, what they did, had nothing to do with it. Two things alone mattered in terms of determining who will be the extraordinarily successful and the rest. The first thing was that the extraordinarily successful groups really believed in themselves. They thought they could do well. They were driven. They were motivated. And we'll talk about that in future lecture as beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. They thought, I'm going to make it. I'm going to succeed. That's the first thing, this sense of confidence. The second thing that he found was that this group, they were always asking questions. Always asking questions, initially of their boss, later of their employees, of their partner, children, parents, friends. They were always asking questions. They were always at this state of curiosity, always looking up, opening up, wanting to understand the world more. They didn't say, okay, now I have my MBA. That's it, I know enough. They were lifelong learners. They were always asking questions. These two distinguishing characteristics account for the difference between the extraordinarily successful and those who were successful. The question that has guided me, whether it's in writing the book, whether it's in creating this class, whether it's first and foremost my personal life, is what I call the question of question, which is, how can we help ourselves and others, individuals, communities, and society become happier? Note that it is not about helping ourselves and others become happy. It is about becoming happier. Why? Because many people ask me, so, Tal, are you happy? And I can't really answer that question. I don't know what it means. Why? Because, how do I determine whether or not I'm happy? Is it compared to someone else? Is there a certain point beyond which I become happy? Happiness is not a binary either or, 0, 1. Either I'm unhappy or I'm happy. Happiness resides on a continuum. So my answer to this question, am I happy, is today I'm happier than I was 15 years ago when I started focusing on this pursuit. 15 years from now, I certainly hope to be happier than I am today. Happiness is a lifelong pursuit. And hopefully this class is part of that pursuit, but just part. You will not be happy at the end of the class. Hopefully you will be happier. Because many people sit here, during the lectures on self-esteem, for example, or when we talk explicitly about happiness, and they say, wait, do I have high self-esteem, thinking about themselves? Do I have high self-esteem or low self-esteem? Irrelevant. Important, impossible to answer also. The question is, how can I improve my self-esteem, my healthy self-esteem, not narcissism, of course? How can I become happier? That's the important question. And this is the question of questions. This class is not a survey of positive psychology. If you want a survey of positive psychology, I can recommend some excellent textbooks, whether it's by Lopez or by Peterson, great textbooks. There's also the Handbook of Positive Psychology, which is a huge book with most of what you want to know about the field. You can also use it in self-defense, very useful in that respect. But a wonderful book, very well written, very accessible in the spirit of positive psychology. But this is not that. This is not a survey of positive psychology. What it is, it's a selective exploration of the question of questions. In that way, it is eclectic. My background is in psychology and philosophy. I studied organizational behavior. I worked as a consultant in business for a few years, still do some work there. I worked in the field of education, do a lot of work in the field of education, and I take from all these areas. I also draw on, not just on positive psychology, I draw on clinical psychology in this class, I draw on cognitive psychology, social psychology, and so on. It's an eclectic class because my guiding question was, what would contribute to happiness? And if something within psychopathology I thought could contribute to our well-being, I took that and used that. If something from the field of consulting and organizational behavior contributes, that became part of the class. As much as I could fit in, of course, in one semester. So the class is eclectic. The class is not cross-cultural. I will bring in ideas from Eastern thought. I lived in Asia for a few years, worked there, studied and continue to study the Eastern philosophies and psychologies, but my training primarily is in Western psychology, and the focus of the class will be that. However, that doesn't mean that positive psychology doesn't apply to people from different places in the world. Now, there was recently a meeting between senior scientists, psychologists from the West, people like Paul Ekman, Richie Davidson, some of the most important minds in the field of psychology, meeting with the Dalai Lama and some of his monks. And they were talking about the future of psychology, about research and how can you research meditation and so on. And one of the things that they were talking a lot about is cross-cultural differences. And when that came up, the Dalai Lama suddenly seemed uneasy. And when Daniel Goleman, who was writing about this whole event, which was held in India, asked him, what's wrong? The Dalai Lama said that he was not comfortable with talking and emphasizing so much cultural differences. Now, you can say many things about the Dalai Lama. One thing you cannot say about him is that he's culturally insensitive. Arguably, one of the most sensitive people alive. And yet he said that we're focusing too much on cultural differences, and he added, not because there are no cultural differences, of course there are, and they're important, but there are many more similarities than differences, and we shouldn't ignore those similarities. Daniel Goleman about the Dalai Lama, we were a little surprised by the Dalai Lama's seeming resistance to the notion of cultural differences. So I will introduce these ideas, but A, because it's not my training, and there are people who focus on cultural differences who would do a much better job than I do. And second, because what I hope to look into is the universal, things that are common across cultures. So we'll study research in this area, but even more than that, we'll become even more particular than just talking about, the psychology in this part of the world. We'll study yourselves. We're going to go that particular. Now, why? You see, when I put this class together, I didn't think to myself, okay, so what are the things that I need to introduce in order to please the participants in the class, the students? That's not what I thought. What I thought about, what was the class that I would have wanted to take as an undergraduate here? What would help me become happier if I were sitting there? In other words, thinking about it from my perspective, from a very personal perspective. In this class, I'm going to encourage you, of course, you look at research and read research about other people, about large sample sizes, but I'm going to encourage you more than anything to look inside yourselves, to study yourselves, whether it's through response papers that will be due weekly, starting in 2 weeks, whether it's in your final project, that will be a presentation that you won't have to give, but you'll have to write out, a presentation about your favorite topic or the topic that matters most to you, whether it's in sections that you'll be talking about, how can I apply these ideas to my life? The time-ins are about thinking about how can I take these ideas and use them. It's about studying ourselves. Because as Carl Rogers says, what is most personal is most general. What is most personal is most general. And as Maslow adds, we must remember that knowledge of one's own deep nature is also simultaneously knowledge of human nature in general. When we understand ourselves better, when we identify ourselves, we're better able to identify with others. In fact, this in many ways is the source of empathy, of healthy empathy. And there's some studies on this showing that people who know themselves, who study themselves, who are self-reflective, display less egregious behavior, less immoral behavior toward others. Behavior that would fall under, say, racism. And it's counterintuitive to some extent. Wait, don't you need to first study the other so that you can be more sensitive to other? Yes, that too. But it's not enough. It's important to also study ourselves, because when we see our deep nature, what we encounter there is actually part of the universal nature, the similarities among us all, regardless of where we're from. And this is what the Dalai Lama was talking about. Not stop cross-cultural, do it, important, but at the same time not ignore the self, not ignore the universal within each one of us. C.S. Lewis, there is one thing and only one in the whole universe which we know more about than we could learn from external observation. That one thing is ourselves. We have, so to speak, inside information. We are in the know. Now, there are, of course, biases when we study ourselves, which is why it's not enough to just study the self. It's important to counter it, to add to it academic work, studying others. And that's why we will do some research, or study research, as well as do some searching inside us. Both are important. We shouldn't, just because there are biases and mistakes that are potentially can be made, it doesn't mean we need to throw out the baby with the bathwater and stop studying ourselves. So we'll do that, or rather you will do that, probably more than in any other class on campus. Finally, this may be news to you, but this is not English 10A or Math 55. Meaning you will not have to read as much as you would read for 10A or for a history class, and this class is not as difficult as Math 55. So you can rest assured, though I'm sure there are some people here who took the class. This class, at the same time, is about rigorous fun. Fun because it's fun to study ourselves. Sometimes it hurts, and sometimes we see things that we may not like, but overall, it's fun, it's interesting. And at the same time, it's rigorous, based on research. Now, many of the ideas that you will encounter in this class are very simple, very accessible, common sense. However, they're simple, not simplistic. And here is the difference. Here is the difference. See, Oliver Wendell Holmes, at least this quote is attributed to him, not 100% sure it's his, said, I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. What Holmes means here is that he doesn't care about just simplicity, easy, off-the-cuff, whimsical ideas. What he does care about, though, is the simplicity that comes after we have chewed the idea, after we have digested it, after we have thought about it. Ideas that have been worked on. And if on the other side of complexity we can reach simplicity and common sense, that's great. That's what he's interested in. That is also what positive psychologists, researchers, whom we'll discuss throughout the semester, are interested in. The simplicity on the other side of complexity. And there's a very big difference between these two kinds of simplicities. Even though, on the face of it, they may, at times, look similar. What this class requires is a very different kind of effort. A very different kind of effort to other classes. Again, it doesn't require the kind of effort that you would need in 55 or in English 10A. The kind of effort that it does require is the effort of application, of applying it to your lives, of introducing behavioral, actual change to your life. And before we go into some of the technicalities of the class, such as the syllabus, I want to end with a story about Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker, whom I quoted earlier, father of the study of management in modern times. Peter Drucker lived to the grand old age of 94, passed away just a couple of years ago, and toward the end of his life, while he was still 100% lucid, it was more difficult for him to be mobile and to go into organizations. So what he did was invite people who wanted consulting from him, wanted to learn from him, would come to his home. And he had presidents and prime ministers of countries, he had CEOs of Fortune 500 companies come and spend the weekend with him. And on Friday, this is how he would start every session with every world leader. Whether in business, whether in non-for-profit, whether in politics. He would say to them the following: on Monday, I don't want you to call me up and tell me how wonderful it was. Meaning how wonderful the weekend was. On Monday, I want you to call me up and tell me what you're doing differently. At the end of the semester, or at the end of a lecture, if you enjoyed it, by all means, tell me that you enjoyed it, that it was fun. But more important, it is what you're doing differently. How this has an impact on your life, and that takes effort. We're going to spend a whole week talking just about change, nothing directly related to positive psychology, just about change, because it is so difficult to change, because we know that most organizational change fails, because we know that most individual change fails, unless we introduce behavioral change along with our cognitive and emotional change. Affect and cognition is not enough. Behavior has to be there as well. What are you doing differently? Now, to do things differently very often takes courage. Some of your response papers that you will hand in are, none of them are graded. They're all just graded pass, fail. You have to hand them in, and then you pass. But some of them will be maybe the most difficult papers that you have written here. For some, they'll be the easiest, and things will just flow out. That's about introducing change. That's about reflecting. That's about taking time in. That's about chipping away the excess stone. And it can only be done through this kind of effort. So if you really want to make this class to make a difference in your life, it's up to you. I'm going to introduce you to the material. I'm going to introduce you to this wonderful new field of positive psychology. What is up to you is to then take it and apply it. I want to talk a little bit about the syllabus and the requirements, and then I'll give some time for questions. But before I do that, I would also like to welcome, I know that some of you are watching this from home, to the Extension School students. It's wonderful to have you here. Do come and visit once in a while. And you'll be working with, obviously as part of this class, but also with Deb Levy, who is the head teaching fellow for the Extension School. The head teaching fellow for the FAS class is Sean Acor. And I'd like just to invite him for just for a few words, just to introduce himself and to you. And you'll be introduced to all the other TFs. We have an amazing team this year. And this is Sean.
Hey, good morning. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. This is an absolute honor to be back teaching for positive psychology again. Tal is too humble. This is not only extraordinary that he's sharing his time with us, but he has actually moved his family back from Israel for the entire semester, his wife and his 2 little children, just so that he could teach this class with us. So it's an absolutely extraordinary opportunity for us to share this moment with him, and I'm really excited about it. Last time we taught this class, we did a survey to find out what type of people were sitting in this room. They're just like yourselves. To find out why you'd be taking this class, because the comment that we get so often about this class is, why would Harvard students possibly be unhappy? What do they have to be unhappy about? They thought that everyone that would be taking this class would be taking it because they're already really happy and they want to study about how amazing they are. And they like to learn things that they can tell their roommates are clearly less well off than themselves. But it turns out actually over a third of the people that took the class last year took the class actually because they felt depressed and that they were trying to learn about the research about positive psychology. Another third did it because they wanted to learn more about optimism. Another third did it for completely different reasons. I think an additional third this year did it because Tal was on Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. So I'm absolutely thrilled about this class. The syllabus, which Tal is about to tell you about, is we learned a couple other things about you guys. Did you know that of the people that took positive psychology, 75% of you are an officer of a club. 35% of you are the highest ranking officer of a club, which means you think there are about 2,000 clubs at Harvard. You're all in a club of 3 and that you happen to be the president. We learned other reasons why you're not happy. We learned that the average number of romantic relationships for people that take positive psychology over the 4 years is between 0 and 1. 0 and 1.
No. Don't believe it.
Don't leave.
Wait, but that was before taking positive psychology.
That was before taking the class. We're going to test you afterwards. The average number of sexual partners, which is between 0 and 0.5. I have no idea what 0.5 sexual partners is. This class is going to be amazing. It was amazing in the past, and Tal is actually, we have an extraordinary teaching staff that's here with us today. It's a large teaching staff, and Tal has actually already given us homework so that the teachers are going to be learning not only the material that you're doing and talking about, which they're experts at, but learning how to be better teachers. He's given us books to read. He's actually given us an assignment. So it's going to be an extraordinary class in that sense. In terms of the syllabus, it's going to be online. Tal is about to describe that now. We decided to go green, so no trees were killed in the making of this class, except for the extraordinarily large auditorium made out of wood. Sections, we're going to section online next weekend. So once we get the numbers in on Wednesday, that following weekend, we will be doing sectioning. That gives you a very short turnaround time, but that way that you can give me Monday to change your sections if you need to, which we hope you won't, and sections will start that following week. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, send me an email.
Okay, so I don't think I'll have to explain to you why. There's one lecture in the semester that I don't teach, and Sean will teach it, and that is the lecture on humor. Figure out why yourselves. I do think you have to walk your talk if you're teaching something. The syllabus. The class, pedagogically, just to introduce you to my thinking about the class, is what I call an integrated class. What that means is that it's integrated vertically as well as horizontally. Vertically, it means that every class is connected to the next class, is connected to every class throughout the semester, around a spiral. So what we talk about next week, we'll revisit again in Lesson 7, Lesson 17, and Lesson 24. Everything is interconnected, only at a higher level of the spiral. In other words, will lead to deeper understanding and hopefully assimilation of the material. So it's vertically interconnected. It's also horizontally interconnected. That means that every part of the class reinforces and influences the other parts. The lectures, not enough. You'll get a lot more in sections. Sections are mandatory. You'll do a lot of work in your sections, very much related to what your response papers that many students claim are the most important part of the class, because that's where you get to time in. That's when you really get to chip away. Very much connected to the final project. The final project is a presentation that you will write out. You will actually give it, but only give it to a couple of friends just to get feedback, not graded on that part. The final project is graded as a final paper, but just what you hand in, what you submit. And the reason why there is the final paper, because the best way, which is like a presentation, because the best way to learn is to teach. And you'll be teaching these materials to other people, or any material that you're interested in your presentation. So the readings, very much connected and about taking you to the next level of understanding and assimilation. So any questions before I finish up? Any questions from you? All right, so let me just say, one second, finishing words. I'm very excited to be back here. My family's very excited to be back here. Looking forward to a meaningful, pleasurable, enjoyable, and happier semester with you. Thank you.